Mr. Krikorian, are you ready with your presentation?
Whenever you're ready, Mr. President.
Yes.
Okay, so what number are we on? I'm confused. I don't think we know yet. Oh, I'm going to do the presentation. Sit down, please. Okay, you want to join us?
Good morning, members. Members, although it's difficult to remember those days now, back in the early 1980s, we had a president who refused to use the word AIDS as our country was startled by the rapid spreading of this disease, which would soon become a global pandemic. Government was failing to act to respond. In 1981, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control first published a report describing a rare lung infection in 5 previously healthy young gay men in Los Angeles. And it was from that first publication that the discussion about AIDS began. And while government largely sat on its hands and ignored the issue as it spread throughout our country and as people suffered grievous losses in communities throughout our country, there was one young man who was watching as this situation unfolded, who was personally impacted by seeing friends around him who became impacted by this. And this young man decided that he needed to act, that it was no longer time to sit, it was time to act. And so he brought his political and organizing skills to bear in a way that no one to that point had ever done. And it was at that moment when Craig Miller, who's with us today, decided that there needed to be a mass participatory event to raise funds and awareness to begin the battle against AIDS. And it was that decision made by this man, Craig Miller, right here in Los Angeles, that led to the very first AIDS Walk Los Angeles. On July 28, 1985, at a time before our president had ever even uttered the word AIDS, Craig Miller led 4,500 people, including Mr. Koretz and then Mayor Tom Bradley, and many other courageous leaders and everyday folks here in Los Angeles in that first AIDS Walk, which raised a then stunning sum of $673,000. Since that first AIDS Walk in the world, many other cities have imitated what we started then here in Los Angeles, and AIDS Walk New York soon began, AIDS Walk San Francisco began, and then AIDS Walks began to spread around the world. Craig Miller, who's standing with us today, has produced every single AIDS Walk Los Angeles, every single AIDS Walk New York, and every single AIDS Walk San Francisco. Craig and his talented team at MZA Events have produced hundreds of public service campaigns and fundraising events, and through those collective efforts, Craig has generated more than $375 million for major AIDS organizations throughout the country, and in so doing has made a dramatic positive impact on the quality of life of countless people throughout our country and indeed around the world. But he didn't stop there. Once that tremendously successful movement was rolling and continuing to spread awareness and raise immense amounts of money, Craig decided that he needed to help prepare the next generation of AIDS activists. And so he founded the AIDS Community Action Foundation to inspire younger people and to continue to lead the fight for equality and dignity for people living with AIDS in a variety of other contexts, including equal treatment by the Social Security Administration. So it's a tremendous pleasure and honor to be able to recognize today Craig Miller, the founder of AIDS Walk Los Angeles, and also to recognize, which we will be on Sunday, a week from Sunday. This Sunday, sorry. So this Sunday, Los Angeles will again be hosting AIDS Walk Los Angeles for the 30th time. The 30th annual AIDS Walk takes place this Sunday, and so it's important that we mark that great annual tradition, but also that we recognize the extraordinary leadership of the man who made it all happen, a young man who had an idea, and through force of will, through leadership, through individual effort, that idea became a global movement. So it's a great pleasure to recognize with you Craig Miller, the founder of the AIDS Walk Los Angeles. And one of those, as I mentioned, one of those who was actually there, one of those courageous leaders who at a time when it wasn't popular stood up and said, I'm going to join in this effort, was our colleague, Paul Koretz. Mr. Koretz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Krikorian and colleagues. I actually was one of those people who can say I knew Craig Miller before he did all this, because I remember him when he was a great staffer for Congressman Tony Bielenson, the late Congressman Bielenson, who was one of our terrific representatives on the West Side and later in the Valley as well. This time's almost exactly to the time when the city of West Hollywood was having its incorporation campaign and just starting out. And while in almost every way that was a great experience, West Hollywood was also, in a way, the epicenter of the AIDS crisis. Through much of its history, over 10% of the housing units in West Hollywood had someone with either HIV or AIDS in them, or multiple individuals. So this is a city very hard hit. And unfortunately, I personally knew literally hundreds of people that died of AIDS in the early days of West Hollywood cityhood. And there was, in addition to just a feeling of great sorrow with the devastation of this disease, there was a feeling of helplessness. What could we do? And the city of Los Angeles and the city of West Hollywood were among only a handful of cities and any government entity that made any attempt to do anything. And both of our cities, which I've had the honor to represent both of them, did a lot of active things, helping to start up nonprofits and helping to participate in programs like this one. But particularly, that feeling of helplessness was really addressed by AIDS Walk, because not only could we help raise money and help provide all kinds of services and steps to deal with the disease and help people to deal with what they were facing and a better quality of life, we were also able to participate in it and be empowered and be doing something positive to strike back at this disease. And who knew? It was a brilliant idea then. Who knew that this would be as brilliant an idea as it's been for a period of 30 years, raising hundreds of millions of dollars and helping thousands and thousands and thousands of people across the country and across the world. I knew Craig was a great guy. I never knew he would have this kind of an impact, but he has, and it's my honor to join Mr. Krikorian in recognizing him here today. So thank you, Craig, for all your incredible work over all these years.
Craig, before you speak, I have two other colleagues that would like to say, I'm sure, kind things about you, so why don't you listen? We have Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Stand here. Hello. Thank you, Mr. President. It's still not on. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Mr. President. Craig, it is great to see you here today. I just wanted to join my colleagues in celebrating you, celebrating the AIDS Walk. I haven't known you as long as Mr. Koretz, only since the early 90s when I was working for Howard Berman back then, and I first got to know you. So it's been many years, and looked up to you, your leadership, the way that you've been able to move this issue forward, that at a time when people didn't even know what AIDS really was, and let alone how to go about trying to bring resources, you stepped in. For these many years, you've not only been someone who I respect and admire, and you've come to be a friend, and I've really enjoyed our friendship, working together on these issues, and I just wish the AIDS Walk many years of good fortune in the future. AIDS is not the epidemic that it once was. It is still a major problem, and you're still on the front lines fighting it, and we're all fighting it, but you have a much bigger team behind you, not only literally the team you have there, but in the larger sense of the team that you've helped build around this issue. So thank you for the 30 years. Thank you for AIDS Walk Los Angeles, and for your friendship, your support, and all that you do and all that AIDS Walk does. Thank you.
Mr. Bonin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Craig, I want to thank you for your 30 years of service. Mr. Krikorian, I want to thank you and Mr. Koretz for this presentation, but particularly Mr. Krikorian for the way you introduced Craig and the history that you provided, hearkening to the dark days of the early 80s. There was a time when everybody failed. It wasn't just the president who refused to say the word AIDS. Local public health agencies failed. The federal government failed. The leadership of the LGBT community failed, and the medical establishment failed. People were governed by both fear and discrimination, but also self-hatred and sort of a paralyzing inability to act. And there were way too few people who stood up and said, attention must be paid, and action must be taken, and the death must stop. Way too few people. And it's important for us to acknowledge those who took those bold steps, and like Craig, were heroic back in those days, like Mr. Koretz, who were heroic back in those days. Because of the steps that you took, things changed. Because of the steps that you took, attention was paid. And because of the steps, and I mean literally the steps that you took in the walk, things changed, and people are alive today because of that. Colleagues, if you ever want to read a damning indictment and a wonderful history, read Randy Shilts and The Band Played On. It talks about how the LGBT leadership, the public health leadership, the medical community, and the government all failed, and how too few voices came out of the wilderness. And Craig, thank you for being one of those voices.
Thank you.
We're not done. Mr. Labange.
I just wanted to thank Mr. Krikorian, Mr. Koretz, but Craig Miller, the wings of an angel. And you go back 30 years, and I know we reminisce a little. Many other people, Eunice Chester, I just want to mention her name, the great government relations person for Paramount, opened the lot, which is where the first AIDS Walk was, and it was just built and built and built on. And then unfortunately, the tragedy of 9/11, they had to move off the lot because of security. But then it fell into the arms of a great little town west of Los Angeles, and the cooperation between our cities, because half the walk is in LA, half in West Hollywood, and the Department of Transportation and the engineers, all this elaborate construction of a concert, of a symphony, of people walking and carrying, and the volunteers, and all the people in the high schools, and all that you've done, Craig, was really special. So I wanted to rise. And also I mentioned the name of Mike Carey. Mike Carey was a great guy, a great city planner. He has an office on the 5th floor. He was one of the first victims of AIDS. He was one of the best-looking guys in this building, and always so good to you when you had a problem. And like a storm, so many people were lost. But now, because of the fight and the efforts of all that are involved, and this walk and bringing awareness, we could beat the fight that's there and win in the battle against AIDS, HIV. So I just want to personally thank you and remember. And also John Ferraro, because it was his district that he sent his young deputy out to direct traffic on a few intersections as well. Congratulations, Craig. Thank you.
Craig, the floor is yours. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you, Council President Wesson, and thank you, Council Members Krikorian and Koretz, and Blumenfield and Bonin and LaBonge, and just for the great amount of support that AIDS Walk Los Angeles, AIDS Project Los Angeles, and I have received from this building over many, many years. Most importantly, I want to acknowledge the greatness and the continuing importance and relevance of AIDS Project Los Angeles and the men and women who devote their working lives to that organization, and the tremendous cadre of APLA volunteers who do deserve a round of applause from all of us. As I said, I have a great affinity for this building. In a way, I'm a child of this building. My father, Jerome F. Miller, served Mayor Tom Bradley for many years here. Mayor Tom Bradley was one of the first elected leaders in this country who had the courage to step forward and stand with us on this issue. We have received tremendous support from council members of this important body for many, many years, and I am grateful, and AIDS Project Los Angeles is grateful. I want to recognize quickly two other entities. First, the Moms of Los Angeles, who collectively have been really a largely unspoken strength behind AIDS Walk Los Angeles and the fight against AIDS. And with just a little bias, I want to introduce my own mom, who's participated in all 30 of them, Marcia Miller. I also want to acknowledge some of the corporations of Los Angeles, in particular Paramount Pictures Corporation, at a time when so many corporations were closing their doors and closing their minds to this issue. Paramount Pictures opened its gates for us, invited us in, and have remained a great strength behind this event. In closing, I just want to say it's important that we remember the lessons that this epidemic has taught us. It's important that we remember that the public health sector has to be allowed a voice, has to be able to lead, has to have the resources and the ability to communicate with people on the sides of transit systems and in all other useful ways that will reach people and keep the importance of this message in the forefront. I'm grateful that the City of Los Angeles has always seen fit to run AIDS Walk Los Angeles ads on LA DOT buses, as it is currently doing. And I'm very excited by the leadership that Council Members Krikorian, Koretz, Blumenfield, and others are showing in implementing and embracing a policy that says the voice of the nonprofit sector, the voice of the public health sector, has to be heard and has to be given even footing with commercial interests. I thank you all so much for your decades of support. Invite you all to be with AIDS Project Los Angeles and AIDS Walk Los Angeles this Sunday. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, and thank you, Mr. Krikorian and Mr. Koretz.